Hi, everyone. This is Danelli. So, today is going to be a little bit of a rough day. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the news that Dolores Huerta released yesterday about Cesar Chavez and the rape, sexual assault that she experienced during her time working with him for the Chicano Latino labor movement in California. Yesterday, I woke up and I pretty much hopped onto Instagram and Facebook, which is normally where I get some of my news. And it was one of the first things that I saw, if not the first thing I saw. And honestly, I can't say I'm shocked because yet another, you know, famous individual, activist, icon, supposedly icon, right, is being revealed as a predator. And unfortunately, it just matches the statistics. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But I was, in general, shocked, I think, at the overall news. And I think I'm still kind of experiencing some of that shock. Um, what can I say? Like the first thing that came to my mind was just like, damn, repeatedly, like, damn, you know. Um, and I will also elaborate more as to why that kept coming up in my mind, but also like, que poco hombre, you know what I mean? As a Latina, I have like so many phrases that I want to say sometimes, and I'm not one of those women that curses in Spanish because I think, don't get me wrong, I love my Spanish, but for me, cursing in Spanish, you really got to be pissed off. Like, you really have to be pissed off, or you have to have a very particular sense of humor because it sounds very intense. And so I've just been like suppressing so many things in my head in Spanish. Qué poco hombre. I no lo puedo creer. But at the same time, sí lo creo. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, it's very tough. And anyways, I am joining you today, this morning. Once again, yesterday I tried doing an initial video about my reaction, and half of it came out great. The other half did not come out great. And so I'm re-recording some of this. So bear with me. Hopefully the quality of the video doesn't fail me this time and I can upload this video today. And you know, you guys can like add some comments. Maybe we can carry this conversation. I think we're gonna have to as a community. But I'm joining you with my cafecito this morning. Here we are. So if you see me taking a sip, please don't judge me because I am a nocturnal animal. So I try super hard to go to sleep early, but sometimes it just does not work. And especially if I've had a rough morning, if I drink a cup of coffee, I notice I stay up super late. So, oh well, my cafecito is just mandatory. Okay. Um, ¿Qué puedo decir? So I woke up and I read Dolores Huerta's statement about Cesar Chavez. I didn't get it from a third party. I follow her directly on Instagram, and so many thoughts, right? I went into the comment section. She has pretty great followers. They're generally very supportive. But this morning I went on to other platforms or pages, and some of the comments there are not so supportive. You have the traditional like victim blaming going on, and in very subtle ways, but also in very blatant ways. And so I had, like a reaction to that. This morning I woke up to additional information. I just want to like share a couple things that I was thinking about yesterday as I was reading this, but I'm going to find the Instagram statement for her because I want to read it here. And I do follow her, so this should be relatively easy. Okay. March 18, 2026. Today, civil rights leader Dolores Huerta issued the following statement. I am nearly 96 years old, and for the last 60 years have kept a secret because I believed that exposing the truth would hurt the farm worker movement I have spent my entire life fighting for. I have encouraged people to always use their voice. Following the New York Times multi-year investigation into sexual misconduct by Cesar Chavez, I can no longer stay silent and must share my own experiences. As a young mother in the 1960s, I experienced two separate sexual encounters with Caesar. The first time I was manipulated and pressured into having sex with him, and I didn't feel I could say no because he was someone that I admired, my boss and the leader of the movement I had already devoted years to my life to. The second time I was forced against my will and in an environment where I felt trapped. I had experienced abuse and sexual violence before, and I convinced myself these were incidents that I had to endure alone and in secret. Both sexual encounters with Caesar led to pregnancies. I chose to keep my pregnancy secret, and after the children were born, I arranged for them to be raised by other families that could give them stable lives. That was her statement yesterday. And when I read this, I cried silent tears for a while. And I think my eyes are still watering a little bit on and off. Give me 1 minute. Morning allergies, but I think I also, you know, was feeling a lot because this is someone who's 96 years old, and, she is finally for the first time probably feeling relative safety in sharing her experience, especially about someone that the community really admires. And I'm not shocked at all that this happened in the 60s because she's not the only one with stories like this. You read memoirs and books about biographies and stuff like that. You see the movies of a lot of women that were starting out their careers, working women, starting out education, were moving into spaces that were traditionally reserved for men. And the stories that have emerged from that generation, these proto-feminists, about the sexual assault, the sexual harassment, the abuse, the stealing of ideas, of work, the devaluation by their employers, those stories are very rampant in that time. And while not a lot of them considered themselves feminists, that's why we call them proto-feminists in feminist studies and in other like women's studies and in other areas of research. We still consider the proto-feminists because they're still doing things that traditionally women were not allowed to do. They're pushing basically for rights, for, to be able to do things that were out of reach for them in the past. And these stories are super rampant, from the 60s to the 80s. And obviously, they're still happening today, and we're still hearing about them today. Was I shocked that it was Cesar Chavez? No. And I will say why in a minute. I actually created a series of posts that I think were very succinct in expressing most of my thoughts right away. And I'm going to read those to you now. I just read Dolores Huerta's story of sexual assault, and I stand with her and any woman that has experienced the same pain. While many want to push the idea that speaking up is usually motivated by money, the truth is the loss is usually greater than any financial reward. The wound of sexual assault penetrates deep into the soul. It hurts the survivor and the community long after it happens. There is no gold at the end of the rainbow. The survivors that kept their silence for a long time did so out of pain because of the circumstances they were in or because their community discouraged brutal honesty around sexual abuse. Some survivors are more likable than others. Some become abusers themselves. Many are not perfect victims. The survivor that eventually decide to share their story in the end usually does it because they realized the ethical and moral value of it. Most are not lying. They simply want their heart at peace. Dolores, I stand with you. Um, that was very heartfelt, and I felt that, you know, I that was the best that I could do at that moment. I cried silent tears for a while, and I didn't know that that was something that I normally did, but I think just like the stress and the pressure and the utter disappointment in what I'm seeing, especially with the Epstein files and then this, it could leave people feeling very overwhelmed and things just bubble up. But it wasn't like a deeply emotional, like explosive crying session. It was just silent tears. And um, yeah, it's really tough. That's all I can say. And you know, I added a caption to the Instagram post that I did yesterday, and I did mention, that oftentimes victims do feel like peace around the issue once they do speak up about it. But a lot of times it comes with the loss of an illusion, right? In this case, the Latino community must grieve the loss of who we thought Cesar Chavez was for us. And, more importantly, we must grieve for the pain Dolores felt she had to endure for the greater good. Rumors of Chavez's sexual misconduct had circled the labor movement for a very long time. Without proof or a survivor statement, the truth and justice evaded us. As the details emerge on this, I hope we can appreciate the vulnerability is strength moving forward. And I still, I will always believe that and firmly believe that when someone holds in a news like this or information like this, oftentimes it's from a deep sense of betrayal, hurt, pain. Um, it's very hard to say something that brutal and that tough and to share, especially when there's still so many unresolved feelings around it and there's so much on the line. I do not blame her for waiting until she's 96 to say something. Um, yeah, it's tough. I've been there myself, to be supportive of women, but to be ready to share your own experience. People cannot force you to heal before you're fully healed. You know, they can't force you to want to share. Um, and for a lot of women, that means trading off ourselves and our healing and justice for ourselves with the community through the legal system in favor of prioritizing other things like private healing, or in her case, it was the labor movement. And she was very clear in her statement that one of the big reasons why she didn't say anything was because he was an icon and people followed him. And there was a lot on the line with the labor movement. And she just felt like she couldn't. Does this mean I think that it changes what we like think about the labor movement? I think it was a plausible fear at the time. I think now we know that like workers deserve good pay. They deserve a good salary. They deserve good treatment. They deserve to be treated, with basic human rights. But in that time, it definitely would have affected and derailed the movement because they would have vilified him and thus everything that the movement stood for. And I don't know that I can say I blame her on top of like the needing space and time and privacy to heal and to come to terms with the fact that you had to carry your rapist child, not just one, but two, and then not being healed enough to feel like you could be a mother to two children that were conceived from rape. As it is, a lot of women already like put up with that when it's their husband and when it's like already in a marriage. I made the controversial statement not too long ago that if we really did the math, that a lot, if not most, of Latino children conceived in and outside of marriage are probably conceived through rape or there's some kind of sexual assault or harassment involved by the husband or another family member. And I stand by that statement because the numbers do not lie. And I'm going to talk about them in a minute. I did like want to explain a little bit more about the information that I found today, just jumping into there. And I'm not going to cover everything. No tengo tiempo para like no tengo tiempo y tampoco tengo mucho espacio emocional para, para leer mucho más de esto. As a survivor, I get very flooded and I get very like triggered emotionally by certain things. And I know for a fact that I'm like almost at my limit with this, especially with the Epstein files, like being on my mind quite a lot right now. So there was Dolores Huerta that made her statement. And this morning I read about the two other confirmed stories by Ana Murgia and Debra Rojas. I didn't get Debra Rojas's age at the time that it occurred, but I believe she may have been like 15. Don't quote me on that. I don't want to be spreading misinformation or false information, but she was very, very young. Ana Murgia, however, was only 13 years old. Okay, let that sink in. 13 años. 13 años, pero he had already started grooming her at about 8 or 9 years old to the, you know, to be able to do what he did by the time she was 13. I, I believe that. It's fitting a pattern. Um, and talking about patterns, That's something that I do want to talk about a little bit here because this is one area in feminist psychoanalysis that I look into a lot. And I have said this multiple times on Instagram, social media, other of my YouTube videos that I really, really love the intersection between feminist psychoanalysis and law and these huge, big public cases because they are very, very important, not just to raise awareness, but to show this is how the mechanism of XYZ works. And I love that the New York Times got involved in this and did an investigation. They are actually known to have probably the most Pulitzer Prize winning journalists like published that have worked with them. So these guys are really into their research. Not only that, but they have a great legal team. I don't say that lightly because I've been following their career for a really long time and I know they do their homework as as much as they can. Like they go in deep. And it doesn't surprise me that Dolores said this was a multi-year investigation because that's on point for them. Um, and I love this because I know they did, like I said, I know they did their homework. And I just want to jump on the bandwagon here and like add some of my own experience and provide a little bit more of information and explanations to some of this and like why it fits a pattern. So key facts that I want to talk about when it comes to perpetrators. Um, where to start? Oh my God. Okay. So statistics, about 97% of men actually are 97% of rape, molestation, abuse cases are done by men, perpetrated by men. Okay, so the statement that not all men, but most men, or always a man, and that's why I prefer the bear thing. There is a an actual consistent result in the statistics and the research. One thing about this that I want to highlight, okay, why it's so bad and why we should be so concerned is because there's something called the replicability crisis within research. What is this, right? Like, what is the replicability crisis? Can never say the word. Damn, sorry. Essentially, it is the margin of error for research conducted. And what it basically says is that you can do the same or a similar research study in a particular field area, like to get particular types of answers or statistics or information. And there is a huge margin of error be from one study to another, from the results in one study to another. So what this means is that if you do the same like study on the percentage of like sexual assault cases done by one gender or another, it's going to vary from like study to research study. There's no like there's a huge margin of error and you can't replicate the results very easily. Okay, so now let's put this into context with other research. This goes for social sciences research, psychology, psychiatry, like you name it, any and every kind of research out there. This just shows that I believe the replicability issue, like the replicability crisis, is around 67%. So there's a 60%, 67% of like you might actually get the same results. I believe there's like a 30% like margin of error Don't quote me on that. I have to go back and like get the specific numbers. But this is a thing. This is like an actual thing that we operate on as researchers from, and we should be operating on from, you know, researchers in the humanities to in the sciences. And this is why a lot of times, especially if you're giving medication, like there's a trial going on, sometimes you got to have a trial go on for a really long time with certain things because you need to close that like margin of error in your results. Like you could put people's lives in danger, like in serious danger. So this is the thing. So when I say 97% of rape, molestation, abuse cases are perpetrated by males, and that is a consistent statistic that has emerged since the 80s to present day, okay, to the present day, consistently across the board globally. And I'm not talking about just the United States or California. No, I'm talking about globally. Statistics all over the world are indicating that this is a consistent number. Ballpark at 97%. That says a lot. Okay. That says a lot. Um, it's brutal. It is so, so brutal to like have to not have to, but like want to hop on here and let people know that this is just not in people's minds. Like these are actual numbers that are turning out to be consistent.
Some stories make us laugh, some make us cry, but the most memorable ones are the ones we share together. Small Town Boy, Niño de Pueblo is a story like no other. Get your copy today at Amazon. It's not always about where you came from, but where you are going.
Okay. I had to pause the video for a minute to fix the lighting because the sun was moving in my direction, and I just want to make sure that um, nothing kind of interferes with the visual of the video. So I was talking about statistics, right? Only about 3% of rape, sexual assault, molestation is done by females. And according to some of the research that I've delved into, researchers are still trying to figure out why there's no correlation, no consistent correlation between the women that do rape, assault, molest others and potential or like former abuse, like abuse in their formative years and or their sexual orientation at the time of the abuse. So there's no correlation, and researchers are still trying to figure out why it is that there is a very strong and consistent correlation between the 97% of male perpetrators and the fact that they were also abused or experienced some kind of abuse of a sexual nature in their formative years. There's also a high correlation between a mother's experience of sexual or physical abuse and a male's predisposition and a female's predisposition to having some sort of addiction, abuse, or sexual abuse history in their life later on. This says a lot because in the context of this controversy with Cesar Chavez, those facts are things that I think the community needs to be very aware of. And the fact that Ana Murgia was only 13 when this happened to her and that he was basically grooming her since the age of 8. That is not, we're not just talking about a rapist that was an opportunist, and because Dolores Huerta was around him, and he wasn't just an opportunist. He was a legitimate predator. He was a legitimate like child molester, abuser, rapist. These kinds of men have a pattern. It's not just grooming and like trying to become the trustworthy person. They have a psychical like fingerprint and a pattern. The reasons why they look for younger targets, vulnerable targets, are because they struggle deep down inside with a deep sense of powerlessness. And I've talked about this sort of powerlessness in the Latino Chicano community, BIPOC communities with other colleagues in the past. And some of them have expressed the fact that a lot of this powerlessness is something that is inherited from, even colonial times because of how brutal it was and how essentially toxic it made masculinity. Because there is a hierarchy even within men, where the brown man, the black man was subject to slavery, because of the white man. And so there is this sort of like internalized inferiority and powerlessness that BIPOC men have had to deal with since colonial times. I want to argue and say since pre-colonial times, because everyone knows, anyone that has studied Latin American history knows that the Aztecs were all about hierarchy, and they were brutal. They enslaved other indigenous communities. And so this is something that existed before colonialization and has actually been exacerbated after colonialization, and it's just becoming a legacy in the community. And we really need to start tackling this. But it's so clear and evident in this case because not only did he do this as an opportunist sexual predator to an adult woman, but we are also seeing the patterns of like a child molester that grooms and selects his victims very carefully. What facilitates this, in the community? I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit more about that. The victim blaming, it's way over the top in the Latino community. Like one thing is being chismosas, and another thing is like being super judgy. And unfortunately, I've seen girls that are, and I've heard of girls that are being criticized just when their breasts are coming in and just when like they're maturing, they're entering puberty and things like that. And people are already you know, basically judging what they're going to be. They're either going to be angels of the house or they're going to be like the whore. You know what I mean? Like that strict dichotomy of that was introduced by Gilbert and Gubar in The Mad Woman in the Attic. Like that is a thing in Latino households. And the more curvaceous the teenager at 12, 13 years old, the more likely she was going to be a hoe. You know what I mean? And that is very concerning because that's already setting up sort of this like facilitation to sexualize teenagers. And these predators, they look for that. They look for the women who have younger women in their life that they're kind of judging in this way because it's easier, right, to create an ambiguous situation where you're questioning the victim and when you can victim blame. And that makes the job easier for these men. Not only that, but I'm sure Dolores didn't understand that supporting sectors of the patriarchy in a certain way often facilitates the fact that they feel that those women owe them subservience and they owe them their sexuality and they owe them something. And so They will also pick women that serve the patriarchy in some way to abuse because not only are they giving easy access to themselves, but they are like catering to that masculinity. It's a very controversial thing to state, especially, in today's climate where we're really trying to build movements that support the Latino Chicano communities. But it is like a brutal truth that needs to be confronted. Now, I can go into a few like additional statistics because I think that is super, super important. What else can I say? I mean, generally, these types of men will kind of struggle with their um, attractions to minor children for a while, but unfortunately, it's considered a psychopathy for a reason. They generally will begin grooming and like moving, taking steps and escalating around 23 years old ish from the ranges that I can like ballpark. And they'll usually start between 23 and 36, give or take. So that gives you an idea of basically what we're talking about and dealing with here. Um, and they tend to be repeat offenders. I am not going to give too much like paralegal talk on this uh like YouTube video because I will be making a separate video or remaking actually because I also lost part of that video yesterday. But essentially most offenders will reoffend even if they had consequences in prison or jail time. They will reoffend by about 60%. And most offenders never stop. They have a very hard time stopping. And unless they're locked up for life or they are chemically castrated or whatever it is, they will continue the rest of their life in one way or another. So you're never really safe with these types of individuals. And this is something that I want to emphasize and highlight because people out there believe they can change. And I'm not here to judge one way or another, but statistics tells you otherwise. Like statistics tell you that they're very likely to reoffend, and 60% is too high for my personal opinion. I'm not comfortable with 60%. Um, and that says a lot about, you know, um, who we have in our communities that we have to be careful with. I do want to also say that, you know, the community has every right to feel betrayal and grief right now because this is not like an inconsequential piece of news. It is very important. We have streets named after this guy and schools. Like, come on, guys. You know what I mean? Um, we have to take accountability as a culture for this, and we also have to take accountability for the patterns that we allowed to perpetuate themselves and that we don't step in to stop because a lot of times there are red flags, there are rumors. And that's something else that I wanted to talk about, right? Was because it doesn't really shock me that this eventually was proven to be correct. There were rumors by people that really studied the Latino Chicano movement for a really, really long time. And unless you have evidence or you have a witness statement or you have a victim statement, it's innocent until proven guilty, right? Um, it's very, very tough to say, but I am a paralegal. So I have like an ethical work and professional duty to emphasize that it's innocent until proven guilty. And you can, while there is like the court of public opinion, we cannot say someone did it or didn't do it without evidence. There needs to be evidence. And I know this is a very tough thing to survive. I've been there, like I have had to wrestle with the moral and ethical like responsibility of not saying something sooner because there most likely will be additional victims or were other additional victims aside from myself. And that is something that like every survivor has to internally negotiate and heal and try to move past because innocent until proven guilty. And it's so important to remind survivors to preserve as much evidence as possible, as much evidence as possible. I know statute of limitations doesn't leave a whole lot of options for survivors to take the time to heal, but also seek justice. The way things are structured, um, it doesn't make, seeking justice easy for victims. It makes it very, very hard. And unfortunately, sometimes the legal process can be very slow for, to handle and deal with certain issues. And I have heard of several stories where perpetrators have attempted to run because it was taking such a long time to get a warrant to arrest these people, and so they left the country ahead of time. And that is something as a community that we need to start educating each other on how to handle these situations more appropriately, so that we are able to get justice. And again, like I don't want to put any like doubts that I'm supporting survivors at all, but I do want to emphasize innocent until proven guilty, preserve the evidence, try your best to open up as many reports as possible, and um basically do due diligence, right? Like follow due diligence as much as possible. Even if you choose to take your time to heal first, keep that in mind. I think it's so, so important. And um, yeah, we have a right to feel betrayed. We have a right to go through the grief process. We also have a right to feel angry because we're going to be hearing a lot of things about these women that it probably is, and it is going to sound very unfair. There is a lot of victim blaming in the community that we need to start curbing and checking. Um, And sometimes it's easier. My personal and professional policy is always to refrain from commenting unless there's a direct statement from a survivor or there's evidence. I want the evidence of either guilt or the evidence of innocence. And this is something that I'm holding tight to when it comes to the Epstein files also. Like Bill Clinton still needs to fork up the receipts to prove that the Secret Service agents didn't actually leave him ever since the moment he got elected. There should be receipts somewhere. He even said it in his deposition that they should have something. So if he 100% never separated himself from Secret Service, because there is that one day that is missing, we're going to find out if, in fact, it is possible for presidents to wander around without Secret Service agents because they are required by law to follow the president from the moment they get elected forward for the rest of their lives. So there should be some kind of evidence. And that's what I'm talking about, right? Like I want receipts. Trust but verify is another strategy. Like trust but verify. Trust that if someone is saying something after such a long time, it's for a reason. But verify, right? Try to have your proof. I hold to this myself as personally and professionally for another reason. A lot of victims and survivors have learned the hard way that retaliation is a thing, and sometimes it shows up as counter lawsuits for defamation. So if there's no proof and you're saying something, it puts victims and survivors into hot water for potentially like ruining someone's reputation because you said something. That's a very tough position, but we see it all the time. That was the basis of the lawsuit, between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. He proved that I think he won his case fair and square. And that's something else that I want to talk about too, right? Like this is Dolores Huerta we're talking about. And these are two credible women that we're talking about here that were investigated by the New York Times. Amber Heard proved herself to be unreliable as an individual and very gaslighty and inconsistent in the facts that she was saying. Hence, she lost her case. A lot of individuals were criticizing her because of that and because she was not the perfect victim. You don't have to be the perfect victim, you don't have to be the perfect survivor. However, when you have a case like that, it does really affect the opinion of individuals in regards to these types of cases. And it does a disservice to women that are trying to seek justice. Again, I'm not saying that you have to have an impeccable reputation, but it is something to keep in mind that counter lawsuits for defamation, if there's no proof, are a very real concern. Hence why a lot of survivors don't say anything for a very, very long time. Number two, if number two, it's so important to make sure you have a reputation that is very good. The brutal reality is that people will look at how much of a credible witness or survivor you are in order to believe that your account is true and basically fact. And they will, put you under a microscope as a survivor. And this is just an unfortunate fact associated to the victim blaming in our communities, but also the way that violence against women is an institutional phenomenon. This is just the case. There are women out there that will say, F you to that and won't care. It's every woman's decision. Unfortunately, it is a fact of life that a jury does, whether we like it or not, take that into consideration if there's going to be a trial or things like that. And there is the court of public opinion. So reputation of the witnesses, of the survivors is very, very important. Those are things to keep in mind. I don't want to, again, like I said, like I don't want to take too much time doing any paralegal talk on here because I did talk about the same subject with NALA, the National Association of Paralegal Assistants, for a webinar that I did with them, a presentation, because I do work in this intersection quite a lot. And, specifically when it comes to like entertainment and like family law, criminal law, corporate law, like there's like a little bit of a bubble that there those laws kind of intersect in. And that's my element. Like those are the type of cases that draw my attention. And so I put together this talk for Nala, and I'm going to be recreating some of it for my YouTube page and hopefully can start a conversation around that because it's research that I've been carrying for a long time with me. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a survivor of sexual assault abuse, and it's a lifelong healing process. Something else to know about this is that many times when you're a victim once, if there's no healing and there's no justice, there's a potential to become a victim multiple times, not just by the same partner, but by different partners. There's about a 60% chance that that's going to happen. And there's also a chance that you're going to actually pass this down as a legacy to your children, particularly your female children, your women children, girls. So this highlights how important it is to like start being able to respond to this crisis, global crisis, as a community, as communities in a much better way. We need to be a lot more proactive with this. But again, I don't want to go too much into the paralegal talk because I will do that in a different video. Comments on social media. That's the last thing I want to talk about that I have on my notes here. Comments on social media. I've read a few since yesterday. You know, like I said, Dolores Huerta has a great following. She basically had a lot of supportive comments on her page, but I've gone back and I read some of the ones from Univision, Channel 34, um, and other pages. I mean, the comments are like, Señora, ¿por qué hasta ahorita? And oh my God. Normally, I would just like brush something off, like give a very neutral answer and brush it off and kind of go about my day, even though my internal mental process is like economize your like emotional investment. Like economize emotionally. Um, this is a skill that I recommend a lot of people learn, but that's just me, you know. I When I hear certain comments or read certain comments, most of the time I think like economize your investment in this because it can leave you emotionally drained and very like triggered and emotional. Like, and I'm talking like angry or upset or like um defensive, things like that. And mm, I have to remind myself and I like to remind others that people don't need to always have access to your thoughts and your emotions and feelings, and reserving some of that for yourself is a critical skill in self-control. And if every time you are triggered emotionally and you get defensive or angry or whatever, you like engage and escalate an issue, that's not always the healthiest thing. And so I totally understand that people don't believe that you like self-control is like good for human beings, that like you should have your feelings. I'm not saying I don't, but I think reactivity is a big sign that you're unhealed. I just want to like reset, like reframe that for people. Reactivity is a sign that you're not healed. You're allowed to have feelings and emotions, but people don't need to have open access to them because that's a way that they can that you make yourself vulnerable to manipulation by others and things like abuse. Many times when people can tell that they're making you feel a certain way, they can manipulate you and like get what they want from you. And there are so many bad people out there. I just give you guys a statistics when a bunch of statistics and information about some of these like psychopathies. So you need to understand that sometimes being on your guard, being like protective of yourself, your internal world, and not being reactive is a healthy thing. I'm not saying like if you see an emergency in front of you that like don't you're just gonna stare. That's not non-reactivity, right? It's like this, if someone is like trying to pick a fight and needle you for a reaction, you don't always have to respond. You can just give a neutral response, say I don't engage with people that way, whatever it is, like find a good way of responding and move on. And I've been reading like some of these comments are so spot on. Like, oh, Dios mío. Like I just said, one of them was like, Señora, ¿por qué hasta ahorita ya tiene 97? It's like, first of all, it's never too late to speak your truth. Um, with this level of betrayal, I think it was necessary for us to know this is something that happened and that was true, and it's not just rumors. And as it is, the rumor thing is sometimes a veiled way in which survivors try to warn potential victims to be careful and not get involved or closer to XYZ individuals. Um, I don't think we're any like the community, I don't think has any right to judge when someone is healed enough to say something, especially when you had to like give up two children because they resulted in pregnancies, and that is tough in and of itself. Opens up the conversation about abortion in the Latino community and how many women must be forced to raise children conceived by rape and not by love or not by desire, and are forced to raise those kids and be stuck in those marriages because let's face it, once a child is in the picture, it becomes easier to manipulate a woman into staying in place. And that is why so many men stealth women in the Latino community and they get them pregnant as soon as possible because they're easier to manipulate. It's harder for them to walk away, and they're easier to financially abuse, and it just becomes like it is a strategy to consistently have access to a woman's life. That is why, that is so it's important we open these conversations up for the Latino community, and why women's empowerment is so important and their ability to be independent and have their rights over their bodies because of all of this. Now, on top of all of this, we as a community are always complaining lately, consistently have been complaining that we don't know where all the fathers have gone. Like, marriage as an institution, as a religious institution, has failed us. More people than ever before are getting separated, divorced. More men than ever before are neglecting their duties. They find it hard to even sustain a family of one child, you know? So, how is it that we're creating, and recreating these cycles without accountability? And then we have the audacity to complain why there's no like upward mobility is so hard. Like there's no real upward mobility, and it becomes very difficult to constantly live below poverty line and build something. It's because of that. Because you have girls that are forced to carry pregnancies and be mothers and stay stuck without resources in the same position over and over and over again. And there's no there's no motivation to change that. So we have to start looking at this. I think it's super important. Let me see if we can check some of the other comments. Like I said, I checked a few different locations, and a lot of people are talking about changing the streets and the name of high schools. I believe Newsom gave a statement already that he's down for that. Um, a lot of people are saying it's a money move. That's another thing I want to talk about. And I really wanted to talk about this because my post also mentioned something like this. So let's just say that, yes, she needs money now, and maybe this is why she strategically waited until now, just in case. Like it was her retirement plan. Let's just say that that's like, she decided to make the best of it, and what the heck? Like, you know, well, number one, when this happened, women didn't have the options we have today. It was a much tougher time for women's rights. Even today, it's very tough. Even just to get a restraining order can take like 6 months to 2 years to even get a hearing and to have a judge that's competent enough to understand that you need XYZ help. Like, I'm just saying, it's a different world. But even in that different world than the 60s when this happened, it's not easy right now. And even, if she decided to, push to reveal this for some kind of financial gain, she didn't necessarily need to talk to the New York Times. She could have just filed a lawsuit for, a civil rights lawsuit and like made this public and pushed for the max amount of money because that's her legal right. Like she's entitled to money. So when someone says things like, oh, hasta que apretó la necesidad del dinerito, I kind of go, de todos modos es su dinero. Like it's her, like she and other victims are entitled to compensation. As a paralegal, I would say like that's literally a fact, especially if there's proof and there's other victims that are corroborating this separately from each other. She's entitled to civil compensations. And I'm going to be brutally honest, also from a paralegal slash survivor. The betrayal that I feel on her behalf and the fact that she felt like she needed to wait until now to say anything, like the secondhand betrayal, the secondhand pain, I can see why it took a long time to say something. And that kind of experience leaves you messed up, in my opinion. And the community loses, the individual loses a lot more than you can ever get back. And that's hard for people to accept that's what it does to a woman. And we're talking about three women, and God knows how many others have gone to their grave without saying anything to anyone. Um, yeah, a lot of individuals are judging the amount of time that it took to say anything. And that's something else I want to say, and I think I want to end with. It's very hard for people in the Latino community that are improperly educated when it comes to sexual assault and abuse to believe that a victim or survivor may not know that their experience is considered rape or sexual assault until a very long time after, until further details or information comes to light. It's very hard for them to believe that the victim might be suffering psychologically and physically, but not understand the reasons why. This happens a lot with children because they're groomed into silence. Many times it's not until they get into their teenage or adult years that they start to realize that, um, that adult that groomed you and asked you to do things or did things to you was actually molesting you. It's very tough, right? And there is a way to cover that legal gap, that I will also talk about in another video. So when you see it pop up on YouTube, please go watch it. Many victims can go a very long time without knowing that what they experienced was sexual assault, rape, molestation, etc. And I'm talking also about young women that were intoxicated in the time that they experienced sexual abuse. And because of the narratives that the community tries to like create around these things, and the fact that many times we normalize certain behaviors, we might not necessarily know that what we experienced was rape, sexual assault until much later. And then there's the healing process and the trying to like understand how this actually happens. And there are so many phases that a survivor goes through. So, like, yeah, it can take a long time for people to say something. And I don't really think we're in a position to judge that, the length of time. So that's something that I want to like leave people with, because on top of maybe not having the legal like paradigm or structure or options in the 60s, there's also a possibility that like it was not part of these victims' psychoeducation to know that what they experienced was abuse. They may have felt like this doesn't feel right, and I feel like they may have felt abused, but they might have known it was abuse. And now there's a label for it. And it takes a while when you grew up in a different paradigm like that to maybe acclimate to what is a possibility now. Um, and so, yeah, it could take a long time. Okay. Thank you for joining me on this talk conversation, and the morning cafecito. Ay, ay, ay. Está cabrón. Yeah, this is tough. Very, very tough. I think we're going to be dealing with this as a community for a while. And I encourage anyone that has comments, stories, anything to add, questions, to put them on this video. I want to say thanks so much for joining me on this conversation, um, taking the time to do some reflection on this. So I will see you next time. Please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you so much, and I will see you again later.